In January of 2023, 35% of Americans tried sobriety on for size for dry January. And although sobriety is still trending in headlines, it isn't always equal to trendiness among your peers. If you count yourself among the newly sober, you may find it more difficult than expected to maintain friendships, navigate adult peer pressure, and find happy hour rituals that don't leave you always explaining yourself. My next guest was an ambitious corporate achiever who always had a full schedule and anxious energy. She felt wine was the glue holding her life together until she realized it wasn't. She later found serenity and sobriety, but it wasn't without some social hiccups. She's now a certified life and sobriety coach who helps busy women quit drinking and create the lives they love. Today, she's going to help the sober curious and newly sober navigate the sticky web of sober friendship and give a few tips to non-sober people on how to support their sober friends. Practical dreamer, recovering people pleaser, fellow podcaster, Casey McGuire Davidson. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for asking. I'm really excited to talk about this.
Me too. I've read that friendship is the number one indicator for quality of life. So figuring out, how to support your friends who are sober and how to figure out friendship while newly sober, I think are really, really important topics.
Yeah, absolutely. And the truth is that most people who drink a lot surround themselves with other drinkers. We're sort of self-selective, and often our universe of activities shrinks down to those that involve alcohol at every single social occasion, including sometimes kids' birthday parties and, anything you can imagine. So it is a bit tricky to navigate that when you decide to take a break from alcohol or realize that it's dragging you down.
Yeah, that's so true. And I definitely want to get into those practical tips on how you rework your social patterns once you're newly sober. But I wanted to ask you first, what held you back from becoming sober?
Yeah. Well, to be honest with you, quitting drinking was literally my worst case scenario in life. And the reason was, and I think a lot of women and people feel this way, is I actually loved alcohol. I was a red wine girl, and it was I loved when I could almost feel it hitting my veins. And you get that combination of relaxation and this buzzy energy, everything is more fun. Now, I realized afterwards, 22 hours of my day were worse because of my drinking. I was more anxious, bloodshot eyes, puffy skin, all the things, terrible sleep, waking up at 3 a.m. And yet I was holding on to this, 2 hours of every day where I got to turn off the work day, turn down the noise of motherhood, and kind of have a party on my couch by myself on a Tuesday night, which is kind of crazy. So a bunch of things held me back. One is I didn't actually want to stop drinking. I really wanted to, quote unquote, drink like a normal person, meaning I could take it or leave it. I could have 2 glasses of wine on a date night and not want the third and not want to drink the next day. So for years, I tried everything I could think of to moderate my drinking, just creating a million rules about what I was going to drink, how much I was going to drink, what days I was going to drink, signing up for running clubs at night, signing up for 5:30 in the morning workouts, literally everything I could. And why I didn't want to stop drinking was, one, I was afraid of what people would think of me, which is crazy. I was a bottle of wine a night girl. I had lots of, I didn't have any big bottom. No one told me to stop drinking, but it was sort of like the death of 1,000 cuts. There were lots of moments I wish I could take back, or evenings I couldn't totally remember, and plenty of hangovers. And yet I was worried what people would think if I stopped drinking, particularly at work. Like I was a director in a Fortune 500 company. Happy hours and business travels and dinners, that was a big part of it. And I was worried that if I stopped drinking, that people would think I had a problem with alcohol, or that I was, the word alcoholic, which I desperately did not want to adopt that label. I spent a lot of years debating whether I was bad enough. You know what I mean? Like, well, I'm not bad enough to have to stop drinking. And we'll talk about how that perception is really, really shifting over the last 5 years. I also I didn't know any people who didn't drink. I knew some people who, there was one girl in college on my women's rugby team who didn't drink. It was a huge drinking culture. But in my mind, because I loved drinking, people who didn't drink were like boring, pregnant, or had a serious issue with drinking and had to quit. Like those were my categories.
I love it. Boring or pregnant. Yeah.
Boring, pregnant, right? Or quote unquote an alcoholic. And just so you know, I do not use that word to refer to myself or anyone else, but that was a huge fear that I had. And I also with my husband, that was a big part of our relationship. We went wine tasting on every anniversary. We used to have mommy play dates with my girlfriends, and everybody would bring our kids and 2 bottles of wine. It was a huge part of my social life. So I didn't know I was like, what do people do on Tuesday nights if they don't drink? Do they just stare at each other? And in looking back, it's a ridiculous fear, but at the time it's very real.
So for you to make that decision to not drink was about wanting to get the 22 hours back.
Yeah. I mean, I sort of, you go through that period of, not knowing, and then pre-contemplation, and then contemplation. So there was a very long time when I loved to drink and didn't think anything of it, right? I was just and it was part of my identity, especially after I became a mom. It sort of signified for me that I was still fun and my life was about more than just my kids. And I was the same person and could have a good time. And yet when you have kids, your life really shrinks. All the things you used to do. I mean, I used to take guitar lessons and go to yoga and go hiking and kayaking, and that all kind of goes away, but you sort of hold on to your drinking. So for a long time, I was oblivious, and then I wasn't. Then I realized that my 3 a.m. wake-ups and my anxiety and feeling unable to cope and, the headaches and the bloodshot eyes, that's all related to drinking. So then I went through the bargaining stage. I'll do this, but not this. I'll do X, but not Y. That didn't work. And then there was pre-contemplation, right? I'm starting to listen to podcasts around sobriety. I'm starting to read, there's a term quitlet, sort of like chicklet, but it's all written by women, memoirs and how-tos and stories about women who stopped drinking. There's a universe of that out there. And then joining a secret private Facebook group. And then finally, 3 a.m. on a Wednesday, I woke up in the morning with the unable to go back to sleep and just being terrified about how I would handle work and business trips and my kids. And I thought, I can't do this to myself anymore. And that day I went into the office. I went online. I signed up with a sober coach that lots of people have told me about. And that was my last day drinking.
Wow. I love that your story is so layered, because I think everyone loves a good rock bottom story. I mean, why else would TLC's Hoarder show be a thing? We all like to watch that show because it makes us feel better about ourselves. And I think that's part of the ingredient of what makes hearing people's like, oh, I was so alcoholic, let me tell you how bad I was stories. But the truth of the matter is that not everyone who decides to quit drinking is or was an alcoholic, or, you know, sometimes it's just for health reasons. So I love that you had like little bits of all these reasons combined in your story, because it's I think more relatable. Where we
Yeah.
watch the TLC Hoarder and it's not relatable. We're like, holy cow, what is happening? But when we listen to a story like yours with alcohol, I think most people go, yeah, I can see myself in this part of her story. And I think that's really powerful. But it definitely doesn't make it easier, especially with the social stuff. Do you remember the first time you told a friend that you had quit drinking?
Yes, I remember it well. But one thing that really helped me was to treat this as an experiment. So,
Oh.
other when I was pregnant, I mean, I was a daily drinker unless I was trying to like, okay, I'll only drink on the weekends or I'll only do XYZ. Other than that, I was sort of a bottle of wine a night, 365 days a year, which sounds crazy now, but you would be surprised how many women are sort of in that category. Maybe it's 4 glasses of wine, not an entire bottle, but it's pretty common. And it was just everybody knew I was a big drinker. Like my husband and I have been together since we were 23. I quit when I was 40. Like it was just part of our relationship. He drank too, but not like I did. Um, and so I was, and yet I had so many things distracting that sort of stopped anyone from questioning my drinking, right? I had a big job, a beautiful house, 2 kids. I was type A, I always got everything done. I even said to my therapist at one point, I said, I'm only hurting myself. Like, my kids aren't suffering. My job isn't suffering. I'm not. And she looked at me and was like, are you listening to yourself? Like, you're hurting yourself with this habit. And yet, your rationalization is it's not really impacting anyone else. So, like I said, I love drinking. I normally couldn't make it past day 4 without alcohol. And when I started with my sober coach, her her process was 100-day challenge. See what 100 days looks like and feels like without drinking. And the reason that time frame is really powerful is your first 2 weeks not drinking, you are going through with withdrawal, even if you're just an occasional drinker, right? Your body, when you drink, a couple times a week, but certainly every night, you're spiking your dopamine off the charts and your serotonin and your cortisol, which is your stress hormone. So dopamine is your happy hormone, serotonin is your mood regulation, cortisol is your stress hormone. It takes 30 days. Your body adjusts your dopamine and serotonin down. It wants to keep you in a middle ground. So it is not your imagination that you are less happy and feel worse and more anxious when you're not drinking. You actually are, but it's because of the alcohol. So first 2 weeks, it's uncomfortable. You have that muscle memory of drinking. You are craving because your body wants you to drink again in the same way that you crave smoking if you're a smoker. I never was, but except when I was 16. Anyway, moving on, not the point. So your first 2 weeks, you're going to feel worse. Around week 3 is the first time that you're like, oh, wow, I'm sleeping better. I'm feeling better. I have a little more energy. If you only do a 30-day break, you're pretty much after that just counting down the days until your reward for not drinking is to drink, right? And my approach is behavior and habit change. So it's really important what your cues and cravings and rewards are, because it impacts how you work. So 100 days, you get far enough away where your body is back to sort of its baseline. you feel happier and more content and less anxiety and less depressed without alcohol. You've also gotten into the habit of not drinking, meaning you aren't automatically on a Friday night thinking about happy hour. You just aren't. You get, I took up running. So I was thinking about my Saturday morning runs. I was thinking about takeout sushi. You kind of get new habits. By 100 days, you look back and say, I can't believe I lived that way. I can't believe I settled for so little joy or rewards when I could be truly happy and expand my universe and have so much more in the world. And you need some distance from it to have that perspective. So I told everyone in my life, I'm doing a 100-day no alcohol challenge for better sleep, more energy, to get into shape. They were all shocked. They were all like, really? My husband didn't think I was going to do it because I'd said I was going to stop drinking before. He was like, yeah, sure. On Thursday, you'll call me asking me to bring you a bottle of wine home.
But I could see as like a type A personality, announcing that you're doing a challenge would be a great way to like approach that subject with your friends, because they'd be like, oh yeah, Casey, she's always doing something crazy, that overachiever. Yeah. So, I mean, that fits. That was actually like super smart.
Well, and then a lot of people as well, like if you say it's a health challenge, they might be like, oh, I could never do that. But then everybody loves to talk about themselves and their health and what they did or should do or whatever. So suddenly everybody's like, oh yeah, I did a, juice cleanse, or, oh, I do Whole30 every January, or, oh my God, I got a Peloton, or I should do X. You know what I mean? Like people like to talk about themselves, but you can very quickly say that and they might give you some questions, some feedback, but people pretty quickly bring it back to themselves, which actually is super helpful.
That is such a good tip. Yeah, people, nobody thinks about you as much as you think about you, right? And so if you can make it an open-ended announcement, I guess, so that they would just boomerang it back to themselves, you're off the hook. What were some of your early pain points socially after the 100-day challenge in terms of sobriety?
Well, there were a lot of pain points during the 100-day challenge, and that's when other people who are doing this with you, and you can meet them online, but they get it. They can support you, and my sober coach helped a lot. For me, it was a lot of block and tackling. Like my husband got promoted and another couple, and my husband and I were going out to a fancy restaurant to celebrate. I was like, oh my God, what am I going to order? When the waitress comes, I'm going to be a deer in the headlight. What am I going to tell the other wife? I mean, all this stuff. And my coach kind of coached me through it. But I mean, little tips like eat protein before you go, because hunger is a huge trigger. So you're not starving when everybody orders the cocktails and then they come and then you sit there, and you feel deprived and less than. Non-alcoholic drinks are incredible and booming. Non-alcoholic beer is no longer like O'Doul's and just terrible. St. Pauli's Girls. There are like microbrews, craft breweries. I was a red wine girl, and yet the non-alcoholic beers helped me a lot. There's non-alcoholic Corona and Guinness, anything you can imagine. There are also non-alcoholic wines, harder to find in a restaurant, but at home, it's pretty easy to order. White wines, champagne, Brut and Prosecco, really good. And then there are non-alcoholic spirits, and you'll be amazed at going to restaurants and they're these zero proof cocktails. So in the beginning, that was, my husband would be like, let's go to this, Italian restaurant or this brewery. And I'd be like, oh, babe, I'm still doing my 100-day challenge. Can we go to this coffee shop with live music? Just suggesting other things. And he was like, okay. But within that 100 days, I mean, my transformation was obvious to everyone around me. I lost like 35 pounds,
Whoa.
which was crazy. Not everyone does that. I obviously had weight to lose, but I ran a 10K for the first time in 6 years. I was so much happier. My skin was better. My eyes were brighter. Like literally, my boss, who had no idea why I was doing this, came up to me after 2 months and was like, all right, I'm doing the no alcohol thing for 30 days because like
Oh.
you look so good. Um, so by 100 days, I just kind of said, you know what? I feel so good. I'm going to see what 6 months feels like and does for me. And that was my husband and I were going to Venice and Croatia, which I'm a red wine girl in Italy. We'd been there before. He was like, seriously, you're not going to drink in Italy? And I was like, nope, I'm not drinking. And I was so proud of myself on that trip. And, instead of the boozy nights and the morning hangovers, I got up before anyone else and walked the canals of Venice and took all these incredible images, just photography before the world got filled with all the tourists, like just empty canals or the early delivery guides. So it's kind of magical when you look at it with curiosity and optimism.
Well, you had me at curiosity, obviously.
Right?
Yeah. So after the point where there's like no challenge, right? Where there's no, oh, I'm doing a health challenge. I'm, I'm curious about how you responded at parties because, you know, people, like you said, assume you're boring or pregnant. And when you're neither of those, they continue to ask why. Partly because they're also curious, but partly because, maybe you just met them and they don't know what else to talk to you about, right? Like they're doing the best that
Yeah.
they can in that social situation as well. So we can't always blame them. But I just wonder how you answer that question without dampening the party vibes, right? You're
Yeah.
like, well, Janet, my Uncle Kevin molested me when I was 10, and instead of dealing with it, I began to drink. But now that I've been to therapy, life's really a much better sober. Like, wah, wah.
Yeah. No, I totally get it. You are not required to tell anyone anything more than you're comfortable with. I think, and this was something I had to learn. I did a couple things. Typically, there are three types of people that you're going to encounter. One are people who just shrug, like they literally don't care or don't notice. And I was shocked because it was such a huge deal to me. Like I went out to a bar with all these coworkers and some guy was like, hey, what you drinking? I was like, oh, actually, I'm not drinking. Or I was like, actually, I don't drink anymore. I'm going to have an X. And he was like, all right, cool. Cracked me up because I was just like, seriously, that is your response. Then you're going to have the people who pressure you. Come on, just have one. That's no fun. Just taste it. Why are you doing it? Those people, honestly, have their own relationship with alcohol that's very complicated. In my mind, I sort of make it look at it like, what if you were to become a vegetarian? That is a health and lifestyle choice. You go out to dinner with anyone and you order, a salad or whatever, vegetable lasagna or whatever it is, and they order a burger. Literally, you are a jerk if you're like, why are you vegetarian? That sucks. Have a bite of burger. Why aren't you, one would do that. They would just be like, all right, I could never do that. Or maybe they're like, I love my steak too much, but they wouldn't pressure you to drink. And so I'm just like, all right, you have a complicated relationship with alcohol. Why is it so important to you for me to consume the same beverage you are? But like, just let it go. The only people I tell more to, and this is interesting, there are those people who drink a lot who will come up to you and be like, how is it? Do you really feel better? Was it hard? And those are the people who I think are contemplating stopping drinking or might be worried about their relationship with alcohol. And I talk to them, but only as much as, is appropriate. I usually keep it to, yeah, actually, I feel a lot better. I don't miss hangovers. I am doing things I hadn't done before. I'm sleeping so well. And then I'm like, yeah, it was hard, actually. I love drinking. It is addictive. It's a super hard habit to break.
Yeah.
And I kind of leave it there unless people might approach you later and then be like, okay, how did you do it? But, now I'm quote unquote out, obviously. And when I wasn't for many years, I wasn't a sober coach. I didn't have a podcast. I was just, in my mind, I'm someone who used to drink a lot and I don't anymore. But now people ask me and they're like, so what do you do? And I was like, yeah, I'm a podcaster. And if they ask more, I'm like podcaster, life coach. And then they're like, okay, what do you coach? I said, oh, I actually help busy women quit drinking. You know, I'm a sober coach. And usually they will immediately take a step back, look at the alcoholic beverage in their hand and be like, oh, actually, I don't drink that much. This is, and I was like, dude,
Oh,
I do not care. You're adorable. You do you. Like,
yeah.
I'm cool, you know?
Yeah, I'm so glad that you brought up the topic of peer pressure because I put it out there for my audience. Like what questions do you have? And we had some really good conversations in the private messages, and a lot of them were about peer pressure. Me personally, I'm not a huge drinker, and I didn't hardly drink at all when I first moved here. And I experienced a lot of peer pressure that I had never experienced in high school. And I was like, what is this? I thought I graduated high school. This is terrible. And so I had one listener say that she went, on a birthday trip with family to Vegas, and they pressured her own family, was like, just have one. What's wrong with you? And then a bachelorette party, it was the same thing. And so my listeners wanted to know, how do you keep those friendships in this tender time of your sobriety? Do you sever them? Do you create specific boundaries? Can you speak to some specifics of what that can look like for newly sober people?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are definitely people who love to drink. And if you love to drink, they're probably very good friends of yours. And it's integrated in everything you do. And we don't realize it, but we've been conditioned since birth to believe that drinking is required to celebrate, to bond, to connect, to make good times better. I mean, the amount of money that goes into marketing alcohol to everyone, but especially women. There are so many people targeting women and mothers with wine specifically. No wonder everyone believes that drinking is required to make the night more special, more fun. Couple tips. First thing I always recommend to my clients is tell people you're not drinking in advance. Don't surprise them with it. People will play off your vibe. So if you're going over to a dinner party, everybody's like, what can I bring? Or if you're, at least tell someone, but if you're going to a girls' night away somewhere or to Vegas, just be like, hey, can't wait, text them. It's going to be amazing. By the way, I'm not drinking. I'm doing a health challenge, but don't worry, I'm bringing all my own stuff. Or I see, Vegas has the best non-alcoholic cocktails. I looked them up, that kind of thing. If people are like, why just have one? And you already told them you're doing a health challenge, you can just be like, oh my gosh, I'm 40 days into my 100-day health challenge. Like, I am absolutely going to do it. I feel so much better. I want to reach that goal. My coworkers were like, every time we went out to happy hour, we're like, okay, when you're done with your 100 days, we're going to go to this bar, to this winery. I mean, they were like planning when it ends. And yet when I finally got there, I was just like, you know what? I feel good. I'm going to keep going, and it kind of eases your friends and your family and your partner to realize that it is still fun, that you can still have a good time. I mean, I didn't even tell my husband all my worries about my relationship with alcohol at all. Like, he was surprised at 100 days when I said I was going to keep going. And I think if I started saying, I'm worried about my drinking, I'm stopping, I might not drink again, he would have been like, you're overreacting. What's going on? What about X? What about Y? But by easing him in by 100 days, we'd gone on a bunch of dates. We'd done a bunch of stuff. We'd had an anniversary. He was like, okay, we're still having sex. Like, all the things that you worry about.
That's so
And
cute. I love how
right.
specific that is because I think people wonder about what does life look like that without alcohol. It's such a
Yeah.
integral part of our culture and integral, I can't even say that word. You know what I'm trying to say? It's a big
Yeah.
part of our friendships as well. All of the rituals, happy hour, book club, which is always really wine club, all of the parties and the get-togethers and there's a lot there that you have to reimagine. But I love how, framing it within a health challenge can kind of create a boundary with those people. Like, hey man, don't mess up my progress. But are there other boundaries that you would suggest for newly sober
Yeah.
people? Yeah, tell me about
Yeah.
those.
Well, the first thing to do is in your first couple weeks, it really helps to build sort of a bubble around yourself. You are going to go through physical withdrawal. And I always talk about it like walking around without your outer layer of skin on. You go through a lot of emotions around it. You're sort of navigating everything in life without drinking. Like, how do I go to this party where we're watching football without drinking? What do I do at 6 p.m.? So in your first couple weeks, you're going to be irritable and sensitive and have cravings for alcohol. So it really helps to treat yourself like you would if you had the flu. Go to bed early, take long walks, go cuddle up and watch a rom-com, whatever it is for you. Don't go to events where you're going to be surrounded by alcohol. I mean, if you had the stomach flu, you wouldn't go. So, I mean, it is perfectly fine to be like, oh my gosh, that sounds amazing. I actually don't feel that well tonight. So I'm not going to come. But how about we get together in 2 weeks? People will be okay with that. I also think it helps to suggest other things. So a lot of people who are big drinkers are also sort of like the social captain of their group, right? They're
Yeah.
always like suggesting things, doing things. That actually helps you a lot when you stop drinking. Like I suggest my clients make a sober summer bucket list and just a list of all the things you always said you were going to do or wanted to do or don't usually get around to. When I was drinking, like I would sign up for 10 a.m. yoga classes on a Sunday and not make it to them because I didn't feel great. So like routine is super helpful, but also you need stuff to look forward to. So I would be like, hey, let's take a lesson on this, or I'm going to go paddleboarding, want to come, or let's do this hike, or how about I canned plum jam. I mean, just all this stuff that's fun and interesting that you don't normally get to. I trained for a triathlon. I mean, you get to embrace stuff and honestly it becomes more interesting.
Yeah.
So instead of happy hour just being like, actually, I'd love to go for a walk with you and get brunch. How does that sound? And most people will be like, sure, that sounds great.
Oh, I could see that. I could see where socially you just go into default mode of doing what you've always done, which is, meet at the bar and, drunky brunchy and all
Yeah.
of those things. I had a question from a listener that kind of relates to that, friends and being interesting cross section. She says, once I stopped drinking, I enjoyed the company of my drunken friends less. I realized how much they repeat themselves while drinking, say offensive things, become argumentative, and just all around find conversation with them less enjoyable. What should I do?
100%. I mean, when you stop drinking, you realize that drunk people are really annoying. I mean, they just are. They're super loud, and so I suggest going to parties kind of early and leaving early. Um, you don't always have to say anything, but if you do, you can kind of say to the host, like, hey, I'm so excited to be here. I actually have to take off a little bit early because I'm doing XYZ in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
Or, if you have kids, they are a great excuse. I am a huge fan of using your kids as an excuse to leave early, which I never used to do when I was drinking. I would keep them up way too long. I'd bring their pajamas, change them into their pajamas there. My husband would always drive home because I was always unable to drive home. But, leaving early is fine. And honestly, drunk people don't usually remember what happened. So I would like either take two cars if my husband wanted to stay longer. I would drive home and let him take an Uber. I mean, just getting creative. It's also okay to ask your spouse for support, like just being like, hey, I'm doing this thing. It's really important to me, but this will be hard. Will you help me get through it? My
Yeah.
husband would always go up to the bar, bring me non-alcoholic drinks. He would tell his friends how proud he was of me in not drinking. I mean, we ask our spouses to support us or our partners or our boyfriends in lots of things, right? Like when I'm trying to like get all healthy, my husband doesn't necessarily want to eat like asparagus and salmon, but he does it, if
Yeah.
I cook it.
Yeah, that's
So
so true. I think, especially women, well, actually, no, I'd say women and men. I think both of us are equally bad at asking for help, asking for support.
yeah,
We razz men about not asking for directions, but really that's not asking for help. And women, we tend to like, just think we can do it all, and so we don't ask for help there. Sadly, we are running out of time. Would you be open to some rapid fire questions?
absolutely.
Okay,
Yes.
super. So I've seen a lot of long Facebook posts about people who are sober, about what it's like to be sober. I always think they're so interesting to read, but I also wonder if they can be off-putting to their non-sober friends. What can newly sober people do to avoid pushing away their friends as they're detoxing their brains and their bodies?
Yeah. I um I love social media. I'm on there, but I, am not one to like share everything about my life on there or use it as a personal journal. I think that finding other people who are also on the alcohol-free journey, also trying to get sober, realize that you hitting day 7 or day 14 might be the longest time you've been alcohol-free in 5 years, and that you deserve a damn parade or like go into a work happy hour and not drinking is hard and incredible, and you're a badass. So people who don't struggle with alcohol will not get it. And that's okay. Your mother, your husband, your bestie may not be the best person. And certainly on social media, your former boss and your cousin and all that stuff. So I again think you share with people. I mean, Brene Brown talks about this all the time. Like you get to choose who you share with and who you let into your arena, and they have to earn it. So I think just sharing as much. I think it's great to share the benefits of sobriety. It can be off-putting if someone delves into all the details. In the same way, like if you wrote on social media, like all this stuff about your divorce or, your spouse cheating on you or, your anything, you can share that, but it's a lot for someone else to digest.
Yeah, it is. Okay, next question is for people who are not following the AA model, which involves apologizing to people that you offended while you were drunk or just generally suffering the consequences of previously being drunk the day before. Is it still important to apologize to the people that were impacted by your drinking?
I think it depends on level of impact to some extent. I didn't, in my mind, I didn't really do anything that bad, wrong, hurt people, you know what I mean? Any more than anyone else did. I feel like when you know better, you do better, and you're allowed to evolve, and people are going to see you being more present and more kind and more responsible. It is absolutely fine to say, hey, I realized that it was really uncool that I shared your story and your information with someone else, or I really got to apologize. I was an idiot when I did that, and I remember it, and I'm sorry. You know what I mean? Like, that is totally legit. But, in terms of in AA, I know you go and you make formal amends to people. And, I've talked to people like Claire Pooley, who wrote the Sober Diaries, fantastic book, if you're in early sobriety. And she said it wasn't so much what she did that she regrets. It was all of those nights and weeks and months, like slipping through her fingers, just not doing much of anything. And so I don't I don't think that unless you want to, you have to call yourself an alcoholic, you have to make amends, you have to do any of those things. This is a positive health move. This is a choice. You're not grounded, like you are allowed to decide that you want a different kind of life than you have right now.
Yeah, I like the way that you can make your own ground rules. And
Yeah.
that's really freeing. I definitely feel like 10 or 15 years ago, the AA model was the only model. And it was if you were, as you alluded to earlier, air quotes, bad enough that you had to go that route. As we wrap up, I would love to hear what you would suggest to people who are supporting their newly sober friends.
Yeah. I would just say be considerate, right? Like if someone's like, I'm not drinking, the first thing you should say is not, oh my God, did something happen? Are you worried you have a problem with alcohol? It should be like, good for you. That's super impressive. How's it going? You know? Um,
I love that
my
response.
right? Like that's great. How do you feel? You again, they'll give you clues if they want to share more from you. A lot of times when you get to a party, someone's like, "Oh, what can I grab you? Is it wine? Is it beer? Is it XYZ?" You don't really care what they drink as a host. You just want them to be taken care of so you know they're good, so you can move on. And yet that can be hard too. I think having non-alcoholic beverage options is great, and it can be, anything, but often something different than water is awesome. My If you know someone's not drinking, like at dinner parties, my husband's best friend like now always has a six pack of my favorite beer, Athletic Brewing Company, because it's in the grocery stores, it's everywhere. So just having options, and sometimes if someone's struggling, be like, oh, I should do that. Let me know how it's going. So, the other thing to keep in mind is that the sober curious movement is huge and growing. Dry January, like you said, 35% of American adults participated. There's Dry July, there's Sober October. Vogue and USA Today and Good Morning America, all of these publications are talking about the sober curious movement, and Gen Z and millennials are really driving it. It's the older generations that drink a lot, and then it filters down somewhat. But Gen Z is drinking 30% less than their parents or grandparents did at the same age. So you're not alone in this, and you will probably find people who are completely cool with it or interested in what you're doing.
Yeah, I love that encouragement. Tell people where they can find you, your podcast, your socials. If you have a private secret Facebook group that they can participate in, where are all the things?
Yeah, absolutely. So my website is hellosomedaycoaching.com. I have a completely free 30-day guide, 30 tips for your first 30 days. that you can find there. I also have a free masterclass, hour-long training on how to successfully quit drinking, even if you've tried and failed before. It's all motivating, it's all empowering, but there are also tips and tricks in there. My podcast is called the Hello Someday podcast for sober, curious women. And on my site, you can find a guide as well to the best private secret Facebook groups for women quitting drinking. And again, you don't have to know or say that you're quitting drinking for the rest of your life. I still don't think or talk about forever. I just don't think it's helpful. Just, get curious, get excited, wonder what a summer could be like with no alcohol, who you could be, what you might do. You know what your life is like with drinking, like the highs and the lows. Don't you want to see how you feel without it?
Yeah, thank you. This was really good. I appreciate you so much. Thanks for coming on and talking about this.
Oh, thank you. This was awesome.
Hey, you're still here. Thanks for watching. If you love breaking free from the algorithm to explore curiosity, join me each week by hitting subscribe and the bell for new upload notifications.